I never thought my life would fall apart over one text message. Caught 3 fish today. Solitude is definitely helping me to clear my mind. Not of a calm lake or a camping tent, but of him, sitting at a seaside bar, his arm wrapped around a lady half his age. I gazed at my husband's message, then at the picture on my screen. The timestamp is 2 minutes ago. Right then, my heart should have broken. It did not. Rather, it grew harder. That's lovely, honey, I texted back, fingers calm despite the storm inside me. I'm so glad you're finding peace in nature. Lauren Carter is my name. Up until 10 minutes ago, I felt I had a good marriage. But now I knew the truth as I sat at my desk in the law firm I worked for. David, my husband, was in a 5-star resort cheating on me rather than in the wilderness detoxing. My best friend and coworker, Rachel, had shown me the terrible Facebook post first. She softly said, "Oh my God, Lauren, I'm so sorry," reaching for my hand. "Who are you going to be?" I closed my laptop deliberately, my courtroom instincts triggered. David was unaware that his meticulously thought-out camping trip was about to bring him down. Pulling up a notepad, I asked, "First, I'd like to know whether the fish are biting." Rachel gasped at me. "Shouldn't you confront him?" Remembering every case I had ever prevailed on, allowing my opponent to believe they had the upper hand, I grinned. David felt he was rather bright. He was unaware, meanwhile, that I was 5 steps ahead already. David and I ran across each other in law school. He was friendly, aspirational, and like me, or so I thought, driven for success. Believing we were a team, I turned down a top position in New York to live in Denver with him. Although both of us had outstanding professions, I observed over time how his pride clenched whenever I exceeded him. Samantha, a new secretary, came into his company 6 months ago. Shang-Chi, lovely, eager to satisfy you. She's really efficient, David had said. At last, someone able to follow my calendar. I had passed over the warning signals, checked my hubby, thought our marriage was perfect. That was a mistake of mine. David, however, had just created an even more massive one. I started walking toward his death early the next morning. David was off camping, and I visited our financial planner and went over every bank transaction he hoped I would not notice. Also, what is first class for? First class passes to that resort. Fancy dinners and jewelry received, not from sadness but from icy, boiling hatred. My stomach turned over. He was not merely fabricating stories. He paid for his affair out of our money. I had closed our joint accounts and shifted my personal funds before lunchtime. By evening, I visited the top divorce attorney in the city. By evening, I was prepared to ground David's universe. For the next several days, I pretended to be the same innocent, committed wife Brandon believed he had misled. I kissed him farewell in the morning. Nothing nice, nothing all day, and well-prepared. His well-prepared falsehoods late at night. Benevolent on the surface, though, I was a woman on a mission. Following my talk with Rachel, I began to put together Brandon's whole degree of dishonesty. It was a meticulously carried-out plan, not only a marital betrayal. The money he had taken from our shared accounts was only a side identity point. His identity was connected to offshore accounts, bogus investment offers, and other aliases spread over several states. The worst of all is also not first among others. Brandon had done this elsewhere previously. Rachel confirmed that he had vanished from Phoenix 3 years earlier under such conditions. He was Brandon Murphy, a smooth-talking financial guru who had assured her of a life of stability and security until one morning she woke up to discover their funds gone, her credit cards maxed out, and Brandon vanished from view. Gritting my teeth, I looked at the papers scattered across my desk yet again. Not yet. I knew I couldn't face Brandon straightforwardly. Like him, people who enjoy control find great satisfaction in it. I had to let him feel he still had the upper hand. He would escape before I could really bring him down if he thought I was onto him. I so performed just as required. I behaved just in enough distraction to let him think I was still blind. I even let him believe I was worried about my own work stress and dropped clues that I was too tired to handle money affairs. Every time I let him believe I was overwhelmed, I could see the gratification in his eyes. I was working harder than I had ever done while he assumed I was floundering. I spoke with my friend Susan, a financial fraud specialist forensic accountant. Her eyes grew wide when I showed her what I had collected, as she had access to databases not open to the general public. "Lana, this is bigger than only some husband running away with your money. These transactions link to known shell companies used for laundering money. If he's involved in this, he's working with some very dangerous people. That ought to have worried me. All I sensed, though, was vindication. Good, I murmured, strengthening my hold on the folder. That means there's a bigger paper trail. Anyone who wants to be the one buries him. The first step was maintaining my personal financial situation. I had previously placed most of my savings into an account Brandon lacked access to, but right now I went one step farther. I locked all of our joint accounts so that any effort at withdrawal would be promptly noted. Just in case he tried to max out before vanishing, I registered fraud alerts on every one of our credit cards. I then opened a phony account. Letting Brandon believe he still had some favorite money was my favorite bit. I created an account with a modest deposit and connected it to my name in a way that suggested a mistake on my part. It was bait. I knew just how long he would bite for. 2 days later, sure enough, I got an unauthorized attempt at unauthorized login noted. Gotcha. Started to smile. Gotcha. Rachel and I kept notes being compared. She panicked and contacted me one evening as I was reviewing more of Brandon's transactions. Lana, I believe he is shifting to his next target. She emailed me a screen grab from an unfamiliar social media account. Caroline Mitchell, a hedge fund manager, was the woman's name, and she possessed real wealth. He has been love-bombing her, Rachel said, telling her he's caught in a bad marriage with an ungrateful wife who doesn't appreciate him, the same lies he told me. Though my tummy turned over, I forced myself to stay cool. This went well. It indicated he was becoming messy. He had time running out if he was already planning his next fraud. I closely examined the images on Caroline's profile. One of them showed Brandon in a country club, all grins, shaking hands with suitably dressed males. He was going to discover he had chosen the wrong woman to con if he believed he could just go on and repeat this. I knew just how to acquire leverage, that which I needed. One of my contacts, drawing on the relationships I had developed in my area, dug deeply into Brandon's financial activity. It was worse than I had anticipated when it returned. Brandon was not a con artist only. He was managing a Ponzi scheme at full capacity. While fooling the next victim, he was accepting money from investors, promising them great returns, and funding his lifestyle off of that income. His whole career consisted of deception, you name it. Embezzlement and wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. It was insufficient to just ruin his life. It was plenty to bury him for aeons of time. And it was at that point I decided it was time for the first official relocation. One evening, I made plans to accidentally leave my laptop open, displaying a screen showing my personal bank statement with a sizable sum of money still apparently unprotected. Pretending to be on a call, I set myself in the kitchen just out of sight. Brandon was watching. I could sense. My phone rang within an hour with another alert. Someone was attempting to move money from my unguarded account. Walking back into the room, I discovered him red-handed on my laptop, keeping my tone light, even as I battled the strong impulse. I said, "Hit him across the face." "Senquired wrong, babe?" I inquired. Brandon spranned. "Oh, close the laptop." "Oh, just checking something for work?" I gave a nice smile. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you were trying to steal from me." His face went white, but I let him have no time to reply. "You see, Brandon, the thing about theft from a forensic accountant is that we track everything. We always know when someone is trying to pull a fast one." He started to swallow fiercely. "Lana, Save it," I said, stern now in voice. "You're done. Tomorrow, so is your whole fraud." Turning, I left him stunned in the kitchen. The fact was that I hadn't yet played my last card. That evening, I sent everything I owned to my attorney. Although some of his activities were known to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, with my records, they had enough to start a comprehensive probe. Everything Brandon believed he had created was already collapsing by the time he woke up the following morning, and I had not finished yet. The instant you found out about betrayal, I used to think, was its worst aspect. That first, gut-wrenching shock when the reality squarely landed on you. But I was mistaken. The waiting was the worst aspect. The discrepancies, the purpose, the pretenses, the purposeful, steady disintegration of a life I had previously considered perfect. I performed perfect for the next week. Every morning, I woke up next to Jackson, kissed him farewell as he headed off to work, and even sent him nice texts saying everything was okay. Underneath, though, I was getting ready for war. I used my days compiling proof. I went over bank records, piecing together his purchases and following every dime that had vanished into the depths of his secret life. And everything I discovered was just misgivings. Validate my darkest misgivings. For more than a year, Jackson had been pouring modest sums at first, but progressively more as he grew more audacious into a private offshore account. Madison Clark then came into play. He had been spending time with a supposedly business associate. Half his age, a lady had somehow persuaded him that it was wise to chuck away our marriage, house, and future. I had located their exchanges and their phone exchanges, even the signed apartment lease under her name. Though he had no idea who he was up against, he believed he was leaving no trace. I had sufficient proof at the end of the week to bury him, but I was hungry for more. I had to personally witness it. The confrontation I never thought possible. I informed Jackson Friday night that I was dining with a buddy. He nodded, undoubtedly texting Madison about their weekend plans, and hardly turned from his phone. But I had dinner elsewhere, not planned. I was headed to the apartment he had leased for his mistress, one location I never would have considered. Heart thumping in my chest, I watched from a distance in my mobile. And then, there they were, laughing as they entered the structure. Jackson and Madison were totally unaware that their little fantasy was about to come down. I waited a few minutes before getting out of my car, hands steady as I went toward the Alreese. His security code is Alreese. His phone has already revealed it. Up the elevator, the walls seemed to be closing in around me. I did not hesitate when I arrived at the apartment. I shook. An interruption, then walk, and then Jackson, standing in the doorway, noticed, and his face turned colorless. "Avery?" he gulped out. Panic flaring in his surprise, I let out a grin. Suppose. Madison was lying on the couch behind him, wearing one of his shirts, her face changing from bewilderment to awareness. I stated casual neighborhood. I was in the neighborhood. Jackson blocked savoring, but I passed him, savoring the place. The pricey decor, the wine glasses on the counter, the clear indication of our money supporting their fantasy. Jackson responded, his voice taut with desperation. "You have to leave." Turning to him, I crossed my arms. "For what reason? Afraid the small is revealed? Keep hidden is revealed?" Madison sat, Jacksoning her ethics? The Jackson. What is this? Oh, honey, Phony murmured, sounding as phony as empathy. "Did you not realize you were the only one misled?" Her gaze fluttered across us. Jackson closed his jaw. He started, "This isn't what you think," but I laughed and cut him off. "You know what's odd?" I got out my phone and tapped the screen, though honestly I was going to let you keep excavating your grave. I held out the evidence. The ballets, the androids, the emails, the lease, and the texts, and started to feel bored. Madison leaned forward, reading the notes, her face paling with each syllable. She said, "Wait," eyes flitting back to Jackson. "You informed me you were separated." I raised an eyebrow. "You? Was that the story he told you?" Jackson moved closer to me, his voice low. "Very. Let's walk outside. We are free to chat." I stayed firm. "Oh, we will chat. Just not exactly the way you wish." Then I emailed every single piece of evidence to his family, clients, and boss. What I had come here to do. Jackson shot for my phone, but it was too late. Damage had been done. I left not to see the consequences. Turning on my heel, I left them behind to sift the clutter. My phone was already exploding by the time I arrived home. Calls from Jackson, from his manager, from his coworkers. I turned aside every single one. The results of my activities made headlines the next morning. Jackson's company lost little time severing relations with him. Investment scandal. I've caught in a financial scandal. They were not free from the demise behavior of dishonesty, of misbehavior, of fraud. All there was. His clients backed out, investors withdrew money, and in 48 hours his whole career was in freefall. Madison, she went off. She turned out not as dedicated to him as he had hoped. She ran, blocking his number and wiping every last trace of their relation. Jackson's things grew messy. About Jackson, looking like a man who had lost everything, he arrived at my door that evening, based on his experiences. "Very, please," he urged. "Let's talk." I looked at him and felt only satisfaction. "You want to talk? What?" His voice quipped. I erred. Isaned forward? Which element? Is that the section you lied in? Stolen from my end? Alternatively, the section in which does it occur? Assumed I would merely let it occur? He started talking, but I stopped him. "Jackson, you cannot change the story. You were lost, and you engaged Yoshiver in this." He let out a weak shiv. "I'm empty now." I nodded and turned to go inside. Not my problem. I closed the door in his face with that as well. The divorce went quickly. Desperate to save whatever dignity Jackson still has, he did not fight me. I grabbed the house, the funds he had neglected, and most importantly, I reversed my life. Though they are mistaken, people often say that getting even is mixed. When served right, revenge is quite delicious. Watching Jackson's fall would provide me some kind of instant comfort, a surge of gratification that would make every sleepless night that it worthwhile. The truth, though, is that it was a gradual burn, one I delighted in daily. His employment initially had to be taken care of. His company moved quickly after they learned of the fraud claims. I behaved to press them. Jackson's behavior spoke for itself. Clients were withdrawing more quickly than he could control damage. Particularly for someone who funded his adulterous lifestyle with funds from his own company, the financial world is unforgiving. His access to the overnight accounts was blocked overnight. By Monday morning, the company had publicly terminated relations with him. Sitting over coffee, I watched the announcement and grinned as his professional reputation fell apart right away. Still, losing his job marked only the start. Jackson was hungry since he had no income and no access to the money he had buried away in offshore accounts. Knowing he would try to save all he could, I made sure he had nothing left to hang on to. That same day his termination was announced, I completed the asset freeze with his attorney. Every bank account he had handled under our shared finances was shut. Every effort he made to withdraw money automatically was greeted with an automatically chilly, account restricted due to ongoing investigation message from his bank. His hurried calls began not too long ago. I said nothing. Rather, I let the quiet serve as a reminder to him that he was really alone and healthy. 2 days later, Madison disappeared off the scene. She turned out not suited for conflict. Jackson vanished the instant she couldn't offer the opulent lifestyle she had signed up for. She banned him on everything, quit responding to his calls, and even moved out of the apartment he had been paying for. When I saw the lease had been put in his name, picture my excitement. Jackson had to break the lease without money, without a job, and with an expensive apartment he didn't afford. He also lacked legal means to utilize it since he had fraudulently utilized business money for part of the deposit. It was at inspiring poetic justice. Jackson was spiraling when he began corresponding with mutual friends, weaving any sob story he could produce. Avery is acting out of vengeance. Avery refuses to let me see her. Avery is working to destroy my life. Oh, how the strong had collapsed. But the thing about betrayal is that it lets individuals show their real selves. Our pals saw through his frantic attempts to pass for the victim not too long ago. Many of them had been at my side through this whole process, observing as I peeled layer after layer of his dishonesty. They were not taken in by it. And the best thing is that, nor was his own family either. Jackson's parents cut him off financially even though they had formerly considered me as the daughter they never had. They saw transactions, and the evidence I had, the transactions, the complete contempt he showed, and apologizing if we created together. Apologizing, they phoned me, embarrassed that their kid had behaved this way. They were disgusted, not only let down, and that, I believe, strikes him more than anything else. Jackson showed up at my front door exactly 1 week. His automobile drew up before I could see him. His slow footfall on my front porch made me get excited. I knew that this aunt would arrive. He had nothing left. Nowhere to go, no money, no encouragement. I unlocked the door and leaned, arm disheveled against the frame. Jackson, disheveled, his customary confidence absent, he seemed like a ghost of himself. Just hear me. Hear very kindly. I tilted my head. Hear you out? You mean the way you heard me out before you emptied our accounts? Or maybe the way you heard me out before you signed a lease for another woman behind my back? His teeth closed tightly. I lost everything. I have nothing left. I messed up, okay? Not my problem. He released a breath, irritation blazing in his eyes. Avery, you don't have to wipe me. Laughed. A real, honest chuckle. Destroy you? Jackson, you did that all on your own. I just didn't let you get away with it. His shoulders slumped, and I sensed for the first time something like true regret. But I was wiser. Jackson regretted losing, not what he had done. He came to regret being captured. Already inquired. The answer was, "What do you want?" I inquired. A second chance. I let the words lie between us and appeared to give them thought. I nodded, then shook my head. No. His face split. Avery, please. I can fix this. I put a nice smile on it. "You do not get to fix me anymore." And I closed the door in front of him with that. Jackson left shortly. By the next morning, he was gone, most likely to whatever dim motel he could find. After that, I had no idea where he had vanished to or why I should care. The divorce came to pass at remarkable speed. Jackson couldn't afford to, thus he did not object. I turned to leave, carrying everything. My possessions, the property, my life. He moved away empty-handed. Still, I did hear of him. Word flies quickly. Last I checked, he was couch surfing with a previous friend likewise in close proximity to cutting him off. His once exciting career was in disarray. Nobody wants to engage a financial advisor with a history of fraud claims connected. Nobody wanted to make investments in a man who had lived on falsehoods. And me also? I bloomed. Jackson's dishonesty pulled me down, but without it, I performed well at work, got promoted, and surrounded myself with people who really appreciated me. I felt free for the first time in years. Jackson's kind of people believe they can get away with everything. They believe they can lie, steal, and control their path of life without paying consequences. Actually, though, every scam comes up to the con artist at last. And when does it occur? Nobody left could help them avoid the fall. I considered the worst to be behind us. When Jackson appeared in my doorway that evening, begging me for another opportunity, I felt I had seen his lowest. I had underappreciated him, though. A man like Jackson never lets go without struggle, and his desperation almost made him dangerous. 2 days after I closed the door in his direction, the first sign showed up. Review email was the case at work. My phone chimed. An email was sent by my bank. Alert. Unusual observation of activity. I clicked it open, and my gut contracted. $15,000 had been attempted to be withdrawn from my savings account. Handshaking, I logged into my banking app. The security precautions I had taken prior to the divorce had helped to identify and reject the effort. Still, that did endeavor to terrify me. The name used in the endeavor was this: Jackson Carter here. He still sought to grab it from me. I gave my attorney an instant call. "He's trying to access my accounts," I responded, just managing my anger. "Not surprising," she groaned. "We will have the bank formally prohibit him from any financial access. Though he has no legal claim, this will not stop him from attempting." "What else is there for me?" I inquired. "Get a restraining order," she said, not too specific. I halted. A restraining order. For Jackson as well, that felt severe. He had stolen, lied, and cheated. He had never been violent. But then I considered his growing reckless attitude. He had already lost how much? The most deadly type is a man left with nothing to lose. I thus applied for the restraining order. And that proved to be the worst choice I had ever made. 1 week came by. Jackson had quieted himself, too silent. I knew more than would have let me believe he had given up. And I was right as well. Late one evening, worn out from work, I got home and saw something unusual in my mailbox. A single envelope. Name is a reference to a return address. My name is printed in block letters here. I opened it exactly under the low porch light. Within was a picture of me, nor any picture, nor just anyone. An earlier that day snapshot of me in my car. The angle was precisely too exact and too close. One had been trailing behind me. A cold ran down my back. Turning, I looked at the vacant street and became immediately acutely conscious of every shadow. As I raced inside, closing every door behind me, my heart hammered. I reported it, phoned the police, and sent everything to my attorney. I had no patience waiting for Jackson to grow more aggressive. I slept alongside my bed that evening with a bat. I slept very barely at all. I still felt tense early the next morning. Early for work, I checked my locks twice before leaving, but I sensed something was strange as soon as I arrived at my car. The side door for the driver was open. My heart shot into my throat as I peeked carefully inside. Until I saw it, nothing seemed out of place at first. A note on my dashboard. "You grabbed everything from my hand. My turn comes next." One could clearly see the handwriting. My breathing shallow, I stepped back from the car, my voice quivering as I described what had happened. I phoned the police once more. The officer sighed after glancing once at the note upon arrival. "You were right to ask for that restraining order," he continued. "If he's this bold, it's just going to intensify." That same day, the restraining order was expedited. That evening, Jackson was served, and I anticipated the reaction right away. Indeed, I was correct. My phone started to flash calls from unidentified numbers that evening. I didn't respond. Then came the books. You are too reactive. Why are you treating me this way? All I want is to chat. You are turning my life upside down. I kept silent. I couldn't. Not one thing to say about the remake finish. Jackson still had to finish, though. Weary and depleted, I entered the office early the next morning. I had hardly slept, watching my security cameras non-stop and hoping Jackson would show up. Though I brushed off my colleagues' observations of my stress, I only had to survive the day. However, about midday, I received a call from the security office of my building. The guard reported, "There's someone downstairs asking for you." I straightened. "Who?" "He won't name himself," he answered. "He is creating a scene, though. About to escort him out is security." I was not precisely sure who to ask. I knew precisely who the person was. I hurried downstairs in time to find Jackson, messy and agitated, being hauled away by 2 security guards. From shouting, "Hi, very," he was raspy, very. "Just have a conversation with me," he humbly begged. "This is not equitable. Hey, Dan!" "You don't get it." Arms crossed, I stood at the entrance looking blank. "I understand exactly," I said loud enough for him to hear. "The cops thus also follow this." His face started to crumble. Reverse. The security guards pushed him from the building. He attempted one more, his voice cracking. "Very kindly, please." I turned around, though, and went inside, totally ignoring him. I visited Jackson Carter, a more time-free man, only one more time. My lawyer called me later that day to update me. "Jackson showed up at your company and broke the restraining order," she stated. "That is sufficient to file charges." I later, and just a moment later, paused. Do it. Jackson had been apprehended by evening, and at last I sighed as I sat in my calm, safe house. I was winning. But now, this was more than simply payback. This had to do with justice. Closure seemed to me like something you had to work for, something you discovered. Actually, though, occasionally closure is presented to you, wrapped in a tidy little box sent right to your house. And for me, that bundle manifested as Jackson's complete collapse. The fallout from my vengeance happened even faster than I had thought. The organization was already looking at his money holistically. They lost no time cutting relations with him as soon as my proof arrived in their inboxes. Clients abandoned him like dead weight days later, and a few days later he was let go. Not formally, not only not on the blacklist, nor only fired. His name in the banking sector was destroyed, Ira Madison? Madison? She disappeared right away with the scandal underway. As it happens, loyalty does not cover guys who lose their jobs and face public humiliation. She removed their images, blocked his number, and carried on as if he never existed. That was hardly the worst of things, though. Jackson considered losing his job to be the absolute lowest. He was mistaken. The legal staff of his company had been poring over his records and discovered far more than just basic fraud. Using investor money, he had diverted funds for business expenses that, upon investigation, connected to his private offshore account. He tried to negotiate when the company confronted him, perhaps hoping he could talk his way out of it. It was about this time he discovered the actual results of his deeds. His company sued him for misbehavior, not just letting him go. And the Securities and Exchange Committee, already, where views were, they were. Jackson's name was linked to an official financial fraud probe a week later. Should he be found guilty, he may be spending years in federal jail. My lawyer forwarded the case paperwork, and I discovered this. Jackson has been misappropriating money for 2 years. 2 ways of siphoning money, of engaging in a risky game he never anticipated losing. And nowadays, the game had finished. His last-ditch effort to retrace steps after everything, after being publicly exposed, sacked, and sued, you would have expected him to know an ish. But no, Jackson turned up at my front door. It was beyond midnight and late. I nearly laughed when I examined the peephole and saw him, even though knocking shocked me. He appeared fractured, dark rings under the suit's eyes. The suit had wrinkles, like a guy bereaved of everything. His voice was hoarse when I opened the door. "Avery," he muttered. "Please, may I have a conversation?" I raised an eyebrow. "You want to discuss right now?" His throat babbled. "I wrecked Mup. Ed up?" I let out a chilly chuckle. "Jackson, you damaged your own life. You are not allowed to stand here and behave as though I owe you a conversation." He ran a shakeable hand over his hair. "You do not grasp?" "Oh, I understand well." I folded my arms and looked at the man who used to believe he was untouchable. "You chewed and chewed, stealing years of worth. For what as well? To be standing here, urging me to pay attention? His jaw tightened and his eyes glittered. I never meant to treat you badly. I laughed. You never intended to be caught? Silence. Jackson spoke nothing at all for the first time. Furthermore, nothing for him appealed to me. Sympathy absent. Without a second thought, just gratification. I need help, he said at last. The lawsuit, the SEC, also known as, I raised my hand, stopped. He turned around and said, Avery, I have nowhere to travel to. I bent my head, acting to consider. Not my issue. I closed the door in his face then, without more words. Jackson's life fell apart quite brilliantly following that evening. His case made news. His accounts were stopped. Within a month, he was formally charged with fraud. Among his assets, the court has his valuable offshore account. He was selling his car, liquidating what he had left to pay for legal bills, last I heard. But his destiny was sealed. His decline from favor was total. Regarding myself, I flourish. Jackson had no resources left to drag it out or money to fight me, so the divorce was settled without challenge. I kept the house, his belongings, and everything he missed a touch on opportunity. And in regard to my career, it flourished. Unanticipated as it was, the incident made me famous. My company appreciated how I managed it. Clients valued my strategic clarity and calm. Pours in from all around. Speaking engagements, promotions, joint ventures. Jackson drowned in legal conflicts during the day. I spent my climbing above my previous level. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter from Jackson. Actually, it was rather poor. Pages of atonement. Declaring he missed me, he said he regretted everything. He still loved me. I hardly gave reading it all much thought either. I shredded it and threw it in the garbage. Some items? They have no right to closure. I had buried him alive with his own blunders. And one thing was very clear as I stood there staring out my office window at my city. I became free, and I had prevailed as well.